Tens of thousands screaming for blood as Emperor Andronikos I Komnenos, who was once hailed as savior, hangs upside down between two marble pillars. His body is broken, his eye gouged, his teeth torn out, yet he refuses to cry out. Soldiers take turns stabbing him as he desperately tries to drink his own blood to survive. This wasn't just an execution. It was the people's revenge, the public tearing apart of their emperor in one of history's most gruesome spectacles. How did a man once adored by the people, a rebel hailed as protector of Byzantium, end up torn apart in front of them? This is not just a tale of tyranny. It is the story of Andronikos I Komnenos, the emperor whose rise was as dramatic as his catastrophic fall. This emperor wasn't simply executed. He was systematically dismantled, piece by piece, over a nightmarish period in the very heart of his capital, at the hands of a mob that once adored him. This is the story of how a city turned on its leader, Andronikos I Komnenos, and subjected him to one of history's most brutal and public revenge killings. A gruesome spectacle that would bring a century of dynastic rule crashing down. To understand how a man could inspire such raw hatred, you first have to understand the man himself. Andronikos Komnenos, born around 1118, was everything a Byzantine nobleman was supposed to be, and then some. He was handsome, intelligent, athletic, and had a magnetic charm that just drew people to him. As a cousin of the reigning emperor, Manuel I Komnenos, he grew up in the opulent and treacherous world of the great palace of Constantinople. In their youth, he and Manuel were close, sharing a love for the hunt and the bond of military campaigns. Andronikos was a capable general, serving the empire on its frontiers against the Seljuk Turks and the Hungarians. But under that loyal surface, a restless and insatiable ambition was brewing. The friendly athletic rivalry he shared with Manuel slowly curdled into a dangerous political one. Andronikos was a notorious womanizer, and his scandalous affairs were the talk of the court. His most infamous was with his own niece, an affair that outraged her family. They set a trap, hoping to catch the lovers and kill Andronikos on the spot. But, warned by his lover, the ever-dramatic Andronikos slashed his way out of her tent with a sword and made a daring escape. His charm could only get him so far. His ambition was obvious, and his loyalty was, to say the least, questionable. In 1155, he was accused of conspiring with the king of Hungary against his own cousin, the emperor. For this treason, he was tossed into a prison tower in the palace. For over a decade, the once dashing adventurer languished in captivity, making several desperate but failed escape attempts. Yet, his spirit never broke. Finally, he succeeded, breaking free and starting a long, winding odyssey of exile that took him across the known world. He roamed from the court of a prince in Kievan Rus to the Crusader kingdoms of the Levant. He even sought refuge with a Turkish emir on the fringes of the empire he once hoped to rule. During this time, he began another scandalous affair, this time with Theodora Komnene, the beautiful widow of the king of Jerusalem and, inconveniently, another of Emperor Manuel's nieces. They were outcasts together and had 2 children, far from the dangers of the imperial court. But the emperor's reach was long. Imperial agents eventually captured Theodora and their children, bringing them to Constantinople as leverage. To get them back, Andronikos had to submit. In 1180, after years in the wilderness, the aging rebel returned to the capital. In a brilliant piece of political theater, he appeared before Emperor Manuel with a heavy chain around his neck, begging for forgiveness. The emperor, perhaps moved by the sight of his once proud cousin so humbled, pardoned him. Andronikos was given a comfortable governorship on the Black Sea coast, where he was reunited with Theodora. It seemed his story was over, but fate had other plans. From his post on the Black Sea, the now 60-something Andronikos saw his chance. He began a careful campaign, positioning himself not as a usurper, but as a savior. He was an elder statesman, an outsider untainted by the capital's corruption. He portrayed himself as the champion of the young emperor, the only one who could save him from his mother's disastrous regency. The people of Constantinople, desperate for a strong leader and furious with the Latin-friendly regime, were ready to believe him. Prophecies began to spread that a man named Andronikos was destined to rule. In the spring of 1182, he assembled a makeshift army and marched on Constantinople. It was less of a war and more of a victory parade. As his forces neared the capital, the city erupted. Popular support for Andronikos turned into a horrific riot. The deep-seated anti-Latin sentiment exploded into a full-blown massacre. The mobs surged through the streets, hunting down Westerners. Thousands of merchants, soldiers, clergy, and their families were slaughtered. Amidst this chaos, Andronikos entered the city as the acclaimed protector of the realm. The hated regents were dealt with, and Andronikos was hailed as a hero. He had played his part perfectly, but the man who promised to be a savior was about to show his true colors. Once in control, Andronikos moved quickly to consolidate his power. His first acts were those of a populist reformer. He launched a massive anti-corruption campaign, a genuinely popular move. He forbade the sale of government offices, increased the salaries of officials to discourage bribery, and severely punished corrupt tax collectors. For a brief moment, it seemed his rule might bring justice to the empire. But this popular image wouldn't last. The mask of the reformer soon slipped to reveal the face of a ruthless tyrant. Andronikos' main goal was to utterly destroy the power of the great aristocratic families who had opposed him for decades. His fight against the aristocracy quickly devolved into a wholesale slaughter. His path to the throne was paved with blood. First, he dealt with the Dowager Empress Maria. After forcing her young son, Emperor Alexius II, to sign his own mother's death warrant, Andronikos had her strangled. With Maria gone, Andronikos had himself crowned co-emperor in September 1183. This co-rule was never going to last. Just 2 months later, the 12-year-old Alexius II was also strangled, his body dumped into the sea. To complete the monstrous takeover, the 65-year-old Andronikos then married Alexius's intended bride, Agnes of France, who was only 12 herself. He was now the sole master of the Byzantine Empire. With the throne secure, his reign of terror began. The capital became a place of fear. Spies were everywhere. Night arrests, sham trials, and summary executions became the norm. Andronikos seemed to want the complete extermination of the aristocracy. Anyone seen as a rival, anyone with a claim to the throne, anyone who had slighted him in the past was a target. Thousands of officials and officers were arrested. Mutilation was a common political tool in Byzantium, and Andronikos used it with relish. His enemies were blinded, had limbs cut off, or were exiled. One historian, horrified by the number of people he had blinded, nicknamed him Misophes, or hater of sunlight. While Andronikos was busy with his internal purges, the empire's foundations began to crumble. His brutal policies destroyed the state's cohesion. By eliminating so many experienced generals, he left the frontiers vulnerable. The Norman kingdom of Sicily, angered by Andronikos' anti-Western policies and the 1182 massacre, prepared a massive invasion. In the summer of 1185, a huge Norman army landed in the Balkans. Their target was Thessalonica, the empire's second city. The defense was led by a man who was utterly incompetent. On August 24, 1185, the Normans breached the walls. What followed was a week of unspeakable horror as the Normans sacked the city, slaughtering thousands. The Archbishop of Thessalonica, Eustathius, an eyewitness, left a harrowing account of the atrocities. News of the fall of Thessalonica caused mass panic in Constantinople. The people who once hailed Andronikos as a savior now saw him as the architect of their ruin. His popularity vanished. The city was a powder keg. Increasingly paranoid, Andronikos consulted a soothsayer, who told him he would be succeeded by a man named Isaac. Andronikos immediately thought of Isaac Angelos, an aristocrat he had previously targeted. He dispatched his most feared lieutenant, Stephen Hagiochristophorites, to arrest and execute him. It was a fatal mistake. On the night of September 11th, 1185, Stephen Hagiochristophorites arrived at the home of Isaac Angelos. Faced with certain death, Isaac fought back, killed Hagiochristophorites, and fled on horseback through the streets, seeking sanctuary in the grand cathedral of Hagia Sophia. Andronikos rushed back to the capital, but it was too late. The city had turned on him. His guards refused to fight. His power had evaporated. His only thought was escape. He boarded a boat with his young wife and a mistress, hoping to flee to Russia, but the winds were against him. Forced back to shore, he was recognized and captured. What followed was not a swift execution. It was a prolonged and savage public spectacle of revenge. The new emperor, Isaac Angelos, handed Andronikos over to the city mob, and the mob that had once carried him to power now became his torturers. For what seemed like an eternity, the former emperor was subjected to unimaginable horrors. He was brought before Isaac, where his right hand was severed with an axe. Thrown into prison without food or water, his torment was just beginning. The next day, he was dragged out again. His teeth were pulled, his hair torn out, and one of his eyes was gouged from its socket. The mob then threw scalding hot water in his face. Finally, they took him to the Hippodrome, the city's great arena for triumphs and punishments. He was stripped and forced to ride a scrawny camel through the streets as a final humiliation, while the populace pelted him with stones and filth. The final, gruesome scene took place at the heart of the Hippodrome. Andronikos was hung upside down by his feet between two pillars. His agony was now a public sport. Still alive, he raised his remaining mangled arm to his mouth, trying to drink his own blood to quench an unbearable thirst. Latin soldiers, who harbored a special hatred for him after the 1182 massacre, took their turn, competing to see who could drive their swords deeper into his suspended body. The chronicler Nicetas Choniates, who witnessed these events, recorded that Andronikos endured his suffering with astonishing bravery, never crying out or begging for mercy. His only repeated words were, "Lord, have mercy upon me, and why do you further bruise a broken reed?" He finally died from his countless wounds on September 12, 1185. But even in death, there was no dignity. His body was torn to pieces by the mob, and his remains were left unburied in the Hippodrome, a grotesque warning to any future tyrants. The death of Andronikos I Komnenos was the end of an era. He was the last of the Komnenos dynasty to rule from Constantinople, a dynasty that had overseen a century of restoration for the Byzantine Empire. His brief reign was catastrophic. His paranoid purges crippled the state, weakened its armies, and shattered the dynastic solidarity that had been the bedrock of Komnenian power. He left behind an empire that was fractured and vulnerable. The man who came to power promising to curb the abuses of the aristocracy became a far greater monster than any he replaced. The Angelos dynasty that followed him proved weak and incompetent. Within 2 decades of Andronikos' horrific death, Constantinople itself would fall to the armies of the Fourth Crusade, an event fueled in part by the anti-Western hatred he had stoked. The story of Andronikos is a stark reminder of the cycles of power and retribution. He was a product of a violent system, and he unleashed that violence on an unprecedented scale. In the end, the very mob he had courted turned on him with a ferocity born of their own desperation and his cruelty. The man who ruled by the sword died by 1,000 swords, his brutal downfall a dark and unforgettable chapter in the long, bloody, and magnificent history of the Byzantine Empire. If you found this look into the brutal history of Byzantium compelling, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories of fallen rulers and forgotten empires. Let us know in the comments which historical figure's downfall you'd like to see us cover next. And for those who want to support the channel directly, consider joining our Patreon, where you can get access to exclusive content and help us continue to bring these incredible stories to life. Thank you for watching.